You're listening to Dadsplaining, a weekly chronicle of all the weirdest, messiest, grossest, and funniest parts of fatherhood, hosted by two first-time dads. I'm Jesse.
And I'm Brandon.
And today we are going to be talking about milestones, walking, talking, and everything in between. Is your kid ahead of schedule, behind schedule? Do you find yourself comparing him or her to other kids of that age? There's insecurities, there's fears, worries. Are they too far behind? Are they too far ahead is probably not something you're worried about, but it's a possibility. And we're just going to dig into all of it. But before we get into everything, Brandon, if our listeners want to reach out to us or connect with us online, where can they find us?
You can find us on all major social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at Dadsplaining Podcast. You can drop us an email at dadsplainingpodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us on all your favorite podcast apps.
Fantastic. So, Brandon, we're recording this episode, just so you guys know, just a couple of days after we recorded last week's episode. We're just kind of playing catch-up a little bit, so we don't have too much to catch up on with each other, except, Brandon, I want to hear how Noah is doing.
Yeah, if you listen to the previous episode, and if you haven't, you can go back and check that out for kind of the full story, but basically my son's been battling a long-term ear infection. And the good news is I think he's turned the corner. We tried some pretty drastic measures, several different rounds of antibiotics to kind of get there, but he seems to be doing better. He's sleeping a little bit better. He's kind of more natural, I would say, during the day. Like the teachers at daycare say he's doing good, and he's kind of, back to being, more of the happy baby and a little bit less of the kind of cranky pants, congested. So, we're feeling pretty confident about it.
That's awesome. I'm really, really glad to hear it. I know that's, when the kid gets sick, that's always, it brings on the worries, and, it's just good to hear that he's feeling better.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And what's been going on with David? Anything new?
So the only kind of new update I have from him in the past couple of days is that he officially had his first fight at daycare.
Oh, snap.
Baby
fight club.
Yeah. So I go to pick him up Monday afternoon, and his teacher tells me when I get in the door, so everything's okay, but David got bitten today. He got bitten on the wrist. So apparently he and another kid who were roughly the same age were going after the same toy. And obviously they both wanted the toy. Neither of them really wanted to share. So apparently some kind of fracas broke out, and David got bitten in the scuffle.
Oh, man.
He was fine. They washed off the bite mark and probably put some ice on and gave him a little TLC. And he had a little red mark on his wrist when I picked him up, but I mean, he was fine. It just goes to show, like, kids bounce back really quickly, especially at this age when they have the attention span of a goldfish. And to add injury to injury, when I was loading him up into the car that evening, I accidentally bumped his head on the door frame.
Oh, fantastic. I've gotten quite good at not bumping my son's head, but then consequently bumping my head on the door.
Yeah. So that's always going to be one or the other.
Exactly.
But again, he was fine, after a second. And, mostly it's like the anxiety and like tension is on the parents' part of like, oh no, what happened? Is he going to be okay? And the kid's like, I'm fine.
Right. He's already moved on to be like, is that chicken? What's going on over there?
What's for dinner, guys?
Right. Exactly. Well, hopefully it just makes him stronger.
Yeah. So we are going to dive right into today's topic. Brandon and I started talking about this earlier this week because, our kids are both around that age where they're picking up a lot of new sort of skills and activities. My son David, of course, just took his first steps a couple of weeks ago. He's 14 months old now. He's adding some sort of words to his vocabulary. And for Noah's part, he's picked up crawling on his hands and knees. And, they're always growing and adding interesting things in other ways. So, Brandon, I feel like a bad friend because I'm always forgetting exactly how many months Noah is now. Is it 10 now?
He's almost 10. Next
almost
week,
10.
Next 10 months, yep.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
So what is where is he right now?
So we're just past the crawling phase, as you mentioned. So he's got that down. He just loves kind of crawling all over the place. We just try to keep him from crawling all over the place, if anything. And now he's kind of at the stage where we're just wondering, like, when is he going to start trying to stand and then walk?
Yeah.
So that's really the next kind of big milestone. David's kind of moved up to that and past that, and he's kind of getting pretty confident on his little feet. And Noah is hopefully trying to get down that same stage. I can already tell he will kind of look at me when I'm on a higher surface than he is. It could be anything because he's small.
Yeah.
So if I'm sitting on the couch, for example, he'll kind of look up at me and think, it's almost as if he's thinking, like, how do I get up there? You can just kind of see it in his eyes. And sometimes he'll even kind of come on over to me and, like, sit down in front of me on the couch, and he'll just kind of just keep staring at it. And he'll be looking at the couch, and he'll be looking back at me, looking at the couch. And then occasionally he's even kind of tried to, it's not like he's really trying to stand up yet, because he probably doesn't, connected even that basic thing yet. But
Right.
he kind of will put his hands on the couch a little bit. And so I'm taking that as, like, he's interested. And he's probably seen kids doing it. And so he's just kind of wondering to himself, like, how's this go? Now, he could be wondering none of these things. He could be wondering, like, why hasn't this fool picked me up and given me my food like he should, because that is what he is here for, to please me and to feed me. Most likely what he's thinking if he were a cat. But I think, one of the things about Milestones is that kind of a monkey see, monkey do approach tends to be incredibly compelling. So whether your kid is going to daycare or not, I think one of the benefits of daycare, and we've had episodes just talking about daycare and kind of our experiences, so if you want, go check that out. But they see other kids every day doing things, and they're all at different stages.
Yeah.
So Noah's in, like, the infant room still, because he's not quite walking. Once he gets to walking, he'll move up. But he's with babies ranging from literal infants, just, basically born only a couple, weeks or months ago, to kids who are a year and who are about to move on and who are already walking. So he's been constantly just seeing every day kids who are crawling, and then he wants to crawl, kids who are standing, he wants to stand, kids that are walking, he wants to walk. So, I mean, that's an incredible motivator. I mean, it's kind of scary almost. Like, you come home one day and you start playing with your kid, and you're like, oh my goodness, what the heck? When did you start crawling?
Yeah.
But, he's been seeing it every day in the background, and so it's just kind of like, I mean, how wouldn't that not, push you or motivate you? Has it been kind of similar with David?
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because the most recent skill he picked up, and I mentioned this on last week's episode, is that he's learned to play peekaboo with his hands. He'll cover his eyes. If you cover your face, he'll take his hands and put them over his eyes and then play peekaboo with you.
Yep.
And I am sure that he learned that in daycare, because it's not something that my wife and I had been showing him in that way. Like, we would cover up our face, or we would, like, hide around a corner, and then we would pop out and say peekaboo. But as far as him taking his hands and putting them over his eyes, that's something that he probably learned from a teacher or a classmate or something like that. And, when it was around the time we put him into daycare, which I want to say was around the 9 to 10 month mark. That's when he started developing, in new ways. Like, he really started getting up on his knees, and then eventually, cruising, which is what we call it when the kid will pull himself up onto a counter, a coffee table, a low surface like that, and kind of cruise along the side of it, kind of walking back and forth, holding it with his hands. That's when he started to pick that stuff up. And that isn't to say that he is, ahead of the curve in every regard, or, that he's even on par with, like, what some sources and some people might say is, like, normal for that age or something like that. For instance, I am reading an article right now from thebump.com, which moms are probably more familiar with this website than dads, but it's a good resource for parents and, of course, women in the pregnancy stage. But they talk about where your kid may typically be, at each month mark. So David is 14 months old. At the 14-month mark, they're talking about milestones. They're talking about walking. They say most 14 months old can stand by themselves and take a few steps without help. And that's kind of where David is. He doesn't really do it that often, I think, just because he still doesn't know for sure that he can.
Well, laziness kicks in very early on in life.
Well, he is my son, Brandon. They say about half are good walkers. Okay, and David's maybe kind of almost at the half mark. They talk about speech. The kid will be saying mama, dada, they say up to 6 words or so. David's maybe got like 4. He'll say mama, mama, da, 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 da. He'll say this if he's holding something or pointing at something that he wants. Teething, of course. I mean, your kid's going to teeth from, what is it, like 6 months when they get their first teeth in onward, until they get all their baby teeth. But they say that they may be getting their first molars at this stage. And David's not there yet. He's still getting kind of the front teeth, the front 4 on top and bottom, roughly.
Got it.
But in terms of behavior, they talk about tantrums. And my son David is definitely at that stage where, for apparently no reason at dinner, he will just take his plate and turn it upside down.
Oh, fun.
And sometimes the food will stay on the tray so I can actually still force him to eat it. But sometimes it'll just go all over the floor, at which point it's like, okay, well, now the dog gets a second dinner tonight.
Perfect, yeah.
Right. And interestingly enough, they mentioned biting, which, as I just mentioned, is something that one of David's buddies at daycare has dipped his toe into that wading
Maybe
pool.
No longer his buddy. We are not cool with this kid.
He's made an enemy for life. And, of course, like if you have your kid in daycare, you're probably going to run into the situation where a lot of daycares these days, they won't tell you which kid it is.
Sure.
Because... I mean, let's
want to avoid the animosity. I mean, it's a child. Like
kids are going to be kids. They're going to get in fights. Of course, if a kid is super aggressive constantly, I want to know about it so I can keep my kid away from him.
Sure.
But the other thing is, not every parent is as cool as me or you, Brandon. you may be surprised to find that a lot of parents get really catty, and I mean, like I
don't want my son playing with that kid ever again.
Yeah, or you see the moms and dads getting into like brawls and fist fights at Little League baseball games and stuff like that. Like the parents get more angry about it than the kids do a lot of times. Yep. So I think they want to avoid stuff like that. So I don't know, which kid it was. I can actually kind of guess because I know what time it was, and I know that at that point there were really only 2 kids in the room.
Oh, look at this. Detective Jesse.
Yep, putting my detective hat on. And I think I know who it is, but I'm not going to judge him.
You got just the stink eye ready for that kid should anything else happen.
Ready and waiting.
But yeah. Well, what's interesting about the story you've got there on the bump, I think that's good to have as a reference point for parents, but something that I think is useful about it is just kind of knowing where you stand, but just as a guide, I think is important because you've mentioned already, like David's got some of those, he doesn't have some of those.
Yeah.
He's fine.
Exactly.
He's doing fine. My son Noah was maybe a little faster on the uptake on some things like his babbling and talking. Like he got mama down super early. He's now all about dada. He doesn't have anything else in his tool bag other than those 2. He just goes back and forth. But, he picked up crawling around the right time, but like the boy hasn't slept through the night yet. Still waiting. And it doesn't mean necessarily that he's behind because if you ask enough parents, you'll hear stories about how kids take a year, 2 years. I mean, God bless those parents.
Yeah.
Before their kids are like really sleeping through the night. So, your thoughts and prayers are appreciated for my wife and I until Noah does sleep through the night. But it just kind of depends. I think it's good to have the reference so that you can be aware because being aware is more important, I think, than being just worried about everything. And obviously you can check in with your pediatrician to know if you're like really worried, like, are you actually behind? Do you actually need to be worried about anything? I would wait for someone like that to give you an indication if you're going to be worried. We actually have a pretty cool baby book. I mean, this isn't uncommon for parents to have, right? Like something you're scrapbooking along the way. But this one in particular is kind of a compilation of not just like, room to scrapbook, but it has a lot of neat prompts throughout the book that kind of help guide you into what you want to put down, which I think is really helpful because as parents, if you just get like a book and you just put pictures in it, you're going to forget or you're going to forget what to write down when. But because it has the prompts, it kind of helps us track such milestones. So like I actually went back and pulled up there's a literal page of milestones that it has in there. And what's hilarious, of course, is that the first thing listed is sleeping through the night. It's got a big old blank next to it.
Yeah.
So love you, Noah. But then it's got all kinds of obvious things like smiling, laughing, rolling over, sitting up, first tooth, eating solid foods, crawling, standing, talking, et cetera, et cetera. So it's got, kind of the gamut of the things you'd want to track. And it's just kind of nice to go back and be like, oh my gosh, back in April, so it took him roughly a month before he first smiled. It took him roughly 2 months before he first laughed. And there's kind of a big gap, really, until he was about 6 months when he started rolling over. 9 months when he starts sitting up, which is pretty much now.
Yeah.
And then, some things that kind of come in like in the middle that you're never really sure when they're going to fall in, like when did his first tooth happen? Noah's first tooth came in around 7 months. But the boy's like growing teeth now. You were talking about David getting his front ones in.
Yeah.
Noah had like 4 rolling in.
Wow.
Like a month ago up top to go with 2 on the bottom. And so that's been super fun to adjust to. Do you guys have anything that you're tracking milestones?
Yeah, so there's an app, and we actually have not been following it as closely in the past several months. Like now that he's just more of a handful, and and we're not
to
so
put it politely,
right. Well, and we're not so worried about the basics. Like when is he, gonna have regular sleep cycles, and when is he?
Yeah, sure.
In terms of like breastfeeding and stuff like that. We're over the hump of a lot of the big things.
Yep.
But we got this app called the Wonder Weeks.
Oh, yeah.
Which is taken from the book, The Wonder Weeks, which my wife read during the pregnancy phase. And we both got the app on our phones. I don't think it was a free app. I think you have to pay.
I think you do it
to
pay a little
download it.
Something, yeah.
Yeah. But what's really cool about it is that it sort of breaks down your kid's development into leaps.
Yep.
So every, I think it's like 3 to 4 weeks. It varies. They'll go through what's called a leap, and your kid may not fall onto that leap on the exact day. But roughly you can look at that, and the calendar will say, "Ding!" Like David is entering leap 10, and then you can go onto the app and say, "Oh, leap 10 is systems," and basically that means like they'll give you a breakdown of at this leap, here are all the things they may be learning, here's the new behavior they may be picking up, and behind the scenes, here's what's happening in their mind right now.
Yeah, which is cool because you get a little bit of insight into what's going on for them because they can't tell you.
Exactly.
You have no idea. And we will probably imagine that they're thinking of nothing, but really the brain for your kid is going through like super complex stuff.
Yeah.
From their perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and at different stages throughout the first 2 years, I mean, even the way they see is growing rapidly.
Yep.
Eventually they start to see more colors. They start to see better detail. They can make out faces and facial details. You know what I mean? And things come into focus. And this app will tell you, at what leap they're starting to see those things. So you can say, well, before this, really, it doesn't do him any good to try and get him to memorize our faces because he can't really see that far ahead, and his mind can't differentiate one facial feature from the next. But at that leap, boom, okay, now he can. It's actually been really helpful because if we start to notice that he's fussing a lot more than normal, or all of a sudden he's waking up twice a night, then we get that calendar reminder. Okay, he's going through a leap, which means because he's developing so rapidly these new sets of skills or features, premium features, there's just a lot more going on, so he's bound to be a little fussy.
Right.
Maybe.
So if he's being extra babyish about something for like a week, you're like, what in the heck is going on?
Exactly.
Why is this happening to me? I thought I had everything down as a parent. And then you just go back and you pull this up and you're like, oh.
Right.
Oh, there's why.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And that is just kind of refreshing. It doesn't help one bit, like in reality, right? But it's just kind of refreshing to know, like, oh, okay, there's a reason for this.
Right.
I'm not just the subject of torture and ridicule for my child. Like, there's something going on behind the scenes. So in addition to that, I think just having a good gut check on kind of potential milestone markers like that gives the parent some information to help them out, because oftentimes it is way too daunting to keep track of all of this, and you don't need a calendar or anything like that. Like, keep it as a coffee table book or something, maybe, as a reference, or on your phone. You kind of pull it up, occasionally when you're curious. You don't have to be OCD about it, but it helps you give an idea of like, what could you maybe focus on as the parent? Because, I mean, for me at least, a lot of the times I didn't really know what to do necessarily with my kid.
Yeah.
Other than, whatever I could just think up, right?
Yeah.
So, oh, okay, we play with the blocks, or, oh, we play with this or that, this toy, that toy. But if you're not thinking about the possibilities of where they could be coming up developmentally, then you can use that with your play.
Yeah.
So, for example, if they should be to a point of like rolling over or sitting up, like maybe you should go a little heavier on that tummy time early on. And I know that was something that was helpful for me because we were terrible at tummy time.
Uh-huh.
Because my son hated it, and I think most kids do. But, if they're not on their tummy and you're just kind of holding them all the time, they're never going to really have as much opportunity to roll over. So, that's one example. Or if they're interested in crawling, like, not just tummy time, but kind of putting them in a position where there are some toys that are more spread out that maybe they will want to go explore. I mean, I think we've all get to that point where we almost kind of like unfairly challenge our kids where it's like, you want to get the toy? Oh, pull it away. Oh, pull it away.
Yeah.
There's a great moment where I was doing this quite a bit with my son, and maybe too much, I don't know, where I was trying to get him to crawl, and I would lay out, some cups that he really enjoys playing with, and he would kind of nudge himself over to one, but he would do anything he could not to crawl to get over to it. He would pivot, roll. I mean, he would barrel roll 20 feet if he wanted to get a toy. And so when he started doing that, I would just like slowly inch the toy away, slowly inch it away, a little cat and mouse game. And I don't know if that's what triggered it or not, but it's just like thinking about the milestones gives you something to kind of work toward. And if you're me, it gives you something to kind of think about as like ways to help play with your kid that can also help with development.
Exactly. So one thing I wanted to bring up today was an article I kind of came across on the web that was published about a week ago on psychcentral.com by a psychologist named Dr. John C. Panapinto. Panapinto? I don't know. But it's called Losing Touch, Revisiting the Importance of Touch and Physical Play in Childhood Development. And it's something that, as I was reading through, I kind of recognized as pretty important for this day and age where technology is kind of everywhere. You can't escape it. Everything is connected, and there are screens everywhere you look. The point that this doctor is making is that as we kind of progress into the future and screen time becomes more of a thing with kids, sometimes, especially here in the U.S., physical activity and sort of rough and tumble play is on the downward slope.
Interesting.
Especially because when you get into school, there's, in high school, they call it zero tolerance. There's no touching allowed, no pushing, no shoving, sometimes no hugging, that kind of thing. Which, there are important reasons behind that. I'm not going to say that that's all bad, but one of the side effects that Dr. Panapinto is saying is that as a result, kids are not doing as much of that rough and tumble play, which is actually what doctors are finding is important for developing sort of emotional intelligence, sort of preventing against physical aggression as kids get older, which, may or may not be related, but I see that in animals too. If you keep a dog on a chain, they're going to be more aggressive because they're not allowed to go out and sniff another dog.
Oh, okay.
But if you introduce, this is just me as a dog owner, if you kind of get them to socialize with other animals, especially at a younger age, they're going to be less aggressive because they're not having to rebel and, tug at that chain to get at the thing they want. But whether or not I should be comparing children to animals is another story.
I think as parents, that's just what happens.
Yeah. But he's got an important point. And what's kind of cool is he says the skin is the body's largest organ and touch is vital to healthy development. He talks about a book that says that touch is 10 times stronger than verbal or emotional contact. We forget that touch is not only basic to our species, but the key to it. Touch is vital to the expression of care and connection and is important to the development of a healthy attachment. Which makes sense. Like you hug and kiss your kids because it forms that sort of parent-child bond.
Right.
And then he goes on to talk about rough and tumble play, wrestling, rough housing, something that me and my brother did a lot growing up, much to the frustration of our parents because he would tend to break a lot of things in the house in the process.
Oh, he would? Oh, okay, not you.
No, not me. I was the golden child.
Absolutely.
Just don't ask him. But he says that, studies find that a relationship between rough and tumble play and physical aggression in early childhood, if the parent, he says if the father specifically, just because we tend to be a little rougher with the kids. Not always, but in most situations. If the father does less of that, there might be a relationship with physical aggression later on. I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah, so kind of like a inverse relationship where like if you're not doing as much of the rough and tumble, then you're going to have more of a chance of physical aggression issues later on for the kid.
Exactly. And he gives a list of pretty cool steps, just helpful tips, make touch a part of relationship rituals. Hug each other when you say hello, goodbye.
Okay.
When you play, when you want to celebrate something, give them a hug, give them, my kid will high five me now. If I stick out my hand and say high five,
cool.
Noah does the same thing.
Yep.
Introduce rough and tumble play if it isn't already a part of your relationship building. He says, like, even if you're wrestling with your kid and they kind of, you let them sort of overpower you. How parents will do with their kids, like, oh, you got me. Lions will do this too with their cubs. Like they'll pretend to be in pain when the little lion cub bites them, and it's super cute. It's important, he says, to still maintain the authoritative stance, like maintain safety, like stop them when it's dangerous, that kind of thing. Like stop them when they're actually hurting someone. Set limits, because limits are important to kids too. But that kind of play, especially when you accompany it with reducing screen time or placing limits on screen time so that they're not just playing with their phones or their iPads, especially as they get older, or watching TV all the time. That kind of increase of physical touch and decrease in just staring at a two-dimensional screen will have a positive effect. Get outside. Snuggle up with a good book. This is something that my wife does a lot better job of this than I do, of reading to our son. Like she'll actually sit in the chair in his room with him and open up a book and try to read to him. I don't do it as much because he doesn't play along. Like I'll open a page and he'll grab it and he'll skip 4 pages ahead and play with it and then skip just back and forth. I'm like, David, you do not understand how a straightforward linear narrative works, man. You got to read beginning to end. You're going to spoil it.
Respect the author.
But that kind of thing, he says that that is a great activity. It's good also to sort of designate a space in the house to do that, so that they develop sort of an attachment in that, and as they get older and have memories and stuff like that. And those are just helpful tips. A lot of that comes instinctively to parents, maybe depending on where you live or what your parents were like growing up with you. But a lot of times that doesn't come naturally, especially if your parents weren't very touchy-feely, rough housing, that kind of thing. It just might be important to sort of consciously tell yourself and remind yourself to do that.
Yeah. Let the kids play in general. Yeah. And then the benefit, I guess, is you can be kind of secret parent helping with the development, because if you let them play, you can also use that to set some guidelines that are helpful for them. So it's like you're kind of backing your way into like well-constructed play.
Exactly.
There you go.
So before we go today, I wanted to answer a couple of comments that we've gotten on our Facebook page. A couple of folks spoke up when we posted last week's episode about childproofing. They posted kind of some cool notes and anecdotes. So our listener, Javier, commented, we were talking about childproofing tips and safety tips, and he said that my grandfather used to cut every single corner of every single thing inside of his house to avoid the fact of hitting myself when I was a baby. Wow. Now in my case as a father, I try not to eliminate danger, but just to teach my boys how to confront danger. How could you be safe in life if you don't see menaces, is what he says, and therefore understand how to deal with them? And that's a good point.
Nice. Yeah.
We talk a lot about what can we do to keep our kids out of harm's way, but you can't prevent every bad thing from happening to them, especially as they get older and go out into the world. So it is important, from an early age to teach them how to confront dangerous situations and actually face them head on and deal with them instead of just avoid. You can't raise your kid in a bubble unless they're Jake Gyllenhaal.
Hilarious. Thanks for the comment, Javier.
Oh, yeah. And then he actually had a conversation with our listener, Karina, who comments on a lot of our episodes. She said, my grandparents used to cut off tennis balls and stick them on the corners of everything. She said, until I was 18 years old.
Whoa. Okay, so you finally learned once you became an adult how not to run into things. Perfect.
Yep. And Karina then went on to talk about, of course, her son who has autism. She says, my son plays with cords, plugging and unplugging over and over again. So I have to put in the outlet covers, but he just learns how to remove them and plugs things back in. And that's actually, that's related to something that my wife brought up, is that our son is drawn like catnip to the laptop charger for her work computer.
Right. Yeah.
So we have to kind of constantly keep an eye on where are the cords, is anything kind of hanging out that he can grab and, stick in his mouth or something like that.
Yep.
So, right along the lines of what we were talking about, kids, it's almost like they find the most dangerous thing and they're drawn to that.
Well, it's the most fun. Or for some reason, they equate like, oh, my parent is interacting with this because we won't eat the cord.
Right.
Or we're playing, quote unquote, with the laptop. And so they're like, oh, that must be fun.
Yeah. And speaking of Karina, she actually commented on our Facebook live stream today for this episode we're recording right now. And, she mentions with autism, milestones are, I like this, sometimes like Paula Abdul, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back.
Okay, nice reference.
If you don't get the reference, go YouTube some of her songs from the 80s. He is potty training and is finally talking. And last week he wanted to pee in his pull-up all week. So it's, and this happens on maybe a smaller scale with a lot of children where they will reach a milestone and then they'll regress sometimes for several months and then they'll catch back up. That happened with my son when he learned how to crawl. He then didn't crawl again for like 5 months.
Right.
And then he finally started to pick up again. So, don't get discouraged if your kid, breaks a barrier and then gives up on it and just goes back to the way they were doing things for a while. Most of the time, that's nothing to worry about. So that's going to do it for this week's episode of Dadsplaining. Hey, Brandon, if our listeners have a comment or a question or they just want to connect with us, where can they find us?
Yeah, you can get in touch with us on all the major social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Dadsplaining Podcast. You can drop us an email at dadsplainingpodcast@gmail.com. And please check out our episodes anywhere you get your podcasts. And please leave us a review if you can. We appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. So, Brandon, what are we going to talk about next week?
Next week, we're going to talk all about socialization. So basically, how are our kids interacting with other people, other kids at daycare? How are they interacting with other family members? Just kind of what that experience has been like as our kids are getting a little bit older and we're more or less introducing them to other people.
Exactly. And hey, between now and then, if you have a thought on that subject, be sure to drop us a line. Leave us a comment on Facebook or send us a message, send us an email. We'd love to bring it up next week. So that's all for now. Until next time, I'm Jesse.
And I'm Brandon.
And hey, Brandon, did I tell you that my wife told me I need to stop watching so many Bruce Willis movies?
No.
Yeah, but hey, it's like they say, old habits, Pulp Fiction.
Okay, wow. Okay, that's a thinker. That's a thinker, but I got
marinate
it.
On that
I got
one
it. Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, Jesse, did you hear about the restaurant on the moon?
No.
Great food, but no atmosphere.
Sounds like I won't be eating there then. All right, thanks for listening, folks.